What's up, Mark Bell's Power Project fam? This episode is brought to you by Piedmonte's Beef. Now, Andrew, you guys know that we've been working with Piedmonte's for a long time. We love their beef. It's tender. It tastes great. But they have this awesome bundle called the Power Project Deluxe Bundle. Deluxe. Okay. Andrew, can you please tell the people what they can get in this bundle?
Yeah, I don't see the deluxe bundle, but I see the deluxe bundle. Yes, the Power Project Deluxe Bundle. Really, this is where I tell people, like, hey, if you don't know exactly which cuts that you like, this is where you're going to want to start, because you're going to get a full array of the entire spectrum of amazing cuts from Piedmonte's beef. Real quick, Nsima, let me know what you think about this. 4 flat iron steaks, 4 flank steaks, 1 tomahawk ribeye steak. Oh, yes. That's king right there. 20 6-ounce ground beef patties, not 26, 20. All right. 4 8-ounce grass-fed, grass-finished New York strips. Those are incredible. And 2 grass-fed, grass-finished bavette steaks, the quote diet steak, because they're like yay big, like 100 grams of protein. They're insane. Seriously though, if you're not sure where to start, this is definitely where you want to go. And in order to get this, you have to go to Piedmontes.com. That's Piedmontes.com. At checkout, enter promo code Power Project for 25% off your order. And if your order is $99 or more, you get free 2-day shipping. Quick caveat, that code will not work on this bundle because you're already saving a ton of money with this bundle. However, once you get this and you figure out exactly what you like, then you can go make your own little bundle yourself and then use that promo code and still get 25% off. Head over there right now.
What up, Power Project crew? This is Josh Settlage, aka Settlegate, here to introduce you to our next guest, Jim Abrams. Jim Abrams is a movie director and writer, best known for being a member of Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker. Jim Abrams was born in Shorewood, Wisconsin, and is the son of an educational researcher and lawyer. He is best known for the spoof movies that he co-wrote and produced with the Zucker brothers, such as Airplane, which was nominated for a BAFTA Award for Best Screenplay, and the Naked Gun series. He has also directed several movies on his own, such as Big Business, and he further honed his skills in parody with Hot Shots and its 1993 sequel, Hot Shots Part 2. Abrams and his wife Nancy are also the co-founders of the Charlie Foundation, which is a foundation designed to help cure pediatric epilepsy. But that is a different story for a different time. Please enjoy this conversation with our guest, Jim Abrams.
All right, so you started the Charlie Foundation many years ago when your son was suffering from epileptic seizures.
Yes. Can
you explain to me a little bit of what is an epileptic seizure? What does it mean?
Well, an epileptic seizure is when the wiring in the brain goes south. And it can manifest, it can be a very subtle movement, like an eye roll, almost a blink. And it can be what most of us think of more commonly as what they call a tonic-clonic seizure, where you lose control of your muscles and you black out, and it can be anywhere in that range that a seizure occurs. Most of us don't know is that there's a world epilepsy population of around 60 million people.
Wow!
So it's much more common than, as I say, than we know. And I think part of that is because there's thousands of years of stigma against people, ignorance against people who have epilepsy, because the movements can be so jarring to anybody who doesn't know. It can be scary, and so over the centuries there have been tons of myths about what causes epilepsy and what seizures are, whether it's demonic possession, stuff like that.
Right. And what does cause it? Like what caused it in your son? Any idea? Like, is it a genetic component to it or something like that?
There can be. 70% of people who develop seizures never find out why. And Charlie, my son, is one of them. We never did learn why. It just out of the blue. One day he started having seizures, and at first they were kind of subtle, but then they got to be much bigger and more dramatic and all that.
Yeah, I'm a parent too, and it just seems to be terrifying to have your child suffer from something, and especially when they suffer from something that you don't know what the hell to do about.
Right.
Where did you guys start? Like, how did you just try to put it in the hands of the doctors, but maybe they don't always have answers, right?
No, that didn't work out. See, yes, we started going to see doctors, first a local neurologist, and then it was a point in my career where things were going quite well, and so indirectly I had connections with lots of big shots at lots of hospitals. So we actually took Charlie, his main pediatric neurologist was at UCLA, but we also got to take him to see heads of pediatric neurology in Boston, Seattle, stuff like that. And they were all in agreement about what we should do. What the treatment options are. They all said, well, you can give him drugs, or you can do brain surgery, and that's about all we can do for you.
And how old was he at this point?
He started having seizures right around his first birthday. And so the following months and they kept getting worse. And by he wound up averaging about 12 seizures a day that we could see. I mean, he was really a sick kid.
They last how many seconds?
Right.
A minute? Or how long do they last?
I'm sorry. They could last anywhere from a split second to 45 minutes. We were told back then in the early 90s that if a seizure lasts more than 30 minutes, it can be dangerous. It can screw up a person's brain. So what we would do when you would start a seizure, first thing Nancy or I would do was just yell out the time. And then if we were he was like 20 minutes into it and he was still, the seizure was still going on, we'd climb in the car and go to the hospital, and they would inject something that would kind of knock him out and hopefully stop the seizure. But it was that was a 30-minute time slot we were told about. But then a few years later, out of the blue, we learned, no, actually, it's after 5 minutes that a seizure can do brain damage. So we had held him there. I mean, I laugh out of pain.
Yeah.
We had held him for long periods of time, many times, and just kept watching the watch and waiting for 20 minutes to pass. So we knew we were 10 minutes from a hospital where they could give him something to stop the seizure.
And then how old were your other children at that time?
Yeah, they were 6 and 7 years older than Charlie was. So it was pretty, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I think one of the really overlooked aspects of epilepsy in children is the effect on siblings.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, they were kind of the hot shots of the house for all those years until their brother came along.
Right.
And then he was so sick, and his mom and I just had no alternative other than to spend lots more time and pay lots more attention to our sick little kid as opposed to these other kids. And that makes siblings, that stirs up a whole bunch of feelings and emotions in siblings.
I heard on another podcast you mentioning you tried to hide it from your other children, but you didn't do a good job of it. Looking back at it, do you think you would have been, I don't have any clue what I would do in the situation, but looking back on it, do you think it would have been better just to kind of sit them down and say, here's what's going on, like we just have no other choice because he's very, very sick?
I think it would have been, I think that's probably what we did say. But that didn't.
It didn't help really. Yeah.
I don't think it helped you. They were
still need time.
I mean, still, when you're a 6 or 7 year old and your friend comes over to play and your little brother has a seizure, it can be embarrassing.
Right.
It was only in later years that Charlie's older brother said, "How could I hate someone I love for having a disease he can't control?" So it's very complicated. And I think but I think it's even more complicated for boys, older brothers, because, we don't even know we have feelings until we're old men. And girls from the time they're little. That's a great way of putting it. Right? Girls, from the time they're little, they're talking about feelings and stuff like that. So Jamie, our daughter, was much more equipped to deal with Charlie being sick than Joseph, his older brother.
At that time, did anyone know anything about how a ketogenic diet or a low-carb diet, how it could help?
Yes. Yeah, it was well known. It was well documented. I mean, one of the big...
But it wasn't mentioned to you?
No, none of the doctors who we took Charlie to see mentioned anything about diet. Not a syllable about diet. And the way I sort of found out about it is, as I mentioned, Charlie's main doctor was at UCLA. And one day we were at UCLA, and after the doctor's appointment, I went to the medical library at UCLA and looked up epilepsy. I know I wasn't trying to find a cure. I mean, that wasn't on my radar. We'd taken him to all these great specialists, and, they said we were pretty much out of luck. But when I looked up pediatric epilepsy in the medical library, very early on, you come across ketogenic diet. And you find out that it was developed in 1921 at the Mayo Clinic to sort of mimic the effects of fasting. It's been known forever. There's even biblical references to people who have bad seizures who fast, and the seizures go away. And that just sat there for hundreds of years until the Mayo Clinic came across that kind of information. They said, can we make a diet that sort of tricks the body into thinking it's fasting? And that was the ketogenic diet. So they started using the ketogenic diet on people with epilepsy as early as the 20s. And what I found in the medical library was that different doctors from different hospitals in different decades, every decade from the 20s to then the 90s, had tried the ketogenic diet on a number of kids with difficult to control seizures. And about 30% had their seizures go away. Another 30% were significantly improved. And for 30% it didn't work. Well, that's an outstanding kind of statistic. To stumble across, especially after nobody had mentioned anything to us. And so
when you found this information out and started to mention it, was there resistance towards that, or were the doctors, or are you just like, hey, this is what my kid's doing, I don't care what you say?
Well, no, we were still young and naive. So yeah, there was resistance. As a matter of fact, at the same time, Nancy, my wife, had come across, through a friend of a friend, an herbalist in Houston, Texas, who gave herbs to kids with bad seizures. And evidently it had some positive effect. So we went to Charlie's pediatric neurologist at UCLA and said, well, listen, we've got two things we've come across. One is this diet that's supposed to help a lot of kids with epilepsy, and the other is an herbalist who works out of a strip mall in Houston, Texas. So Charlie's doctor said, I flip a coin, I don't think either will work. And so for the last time, we took his advice, we flipped the coin, came up Houston. So we got on a plane with Charlie and went to the strip mall in Houston, and this guy, nice guy, gave us some herbs, and they didn't work. And around the same time, because I was now obsessed with this diet thing, I had come across a study that was published in a medical epilepsy, which is the #1 epilepsy medical journal in the United States. And in the article in Epilepsy, it was written by a doctor from Johns Hopkins Hospital and a couple of other people who worked at Johns Hopkins. And it was published in 1992, the year before Charlie got sick. So it's kind of hot off the presses in the biggest magazine or journal. And it said they had tracked 58 consecutive kids who were as sick as Charlie, multiple daily seizures, multiple daily medicines. And they had, of the 58 kids, 29% became seizure-free on this ketogenic diet. So I called the doctor from Johns Hopkins who wrote the article, and we chatted, and he said, send Charlie's records, and we did. And he said, why don't you bring Charlie to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and we'll try the diet. And at the time, Charlie was on 4 anti-epileptic medicines and averaging, like I say, about a dozen seizures a day, and experiencing what they called progressive retardation. And 2 days after Charlie started the diet at Johns Hopkins, his seizures disappeared.
Wow.
They went away. And within a month, Dr. Freeman from Hopkins had weaned him off all of his drugs. And that was, it was right before his second birthday, and he just turned 29. He's never had another seizure.
He just turned 29 recently?
In real life, yeah.
And he's no longer on a ketogenic diet.
He was on the diet for 5 years. We had one experience back then, the lore, and I think it still is, when a kid does as well as Charlie on the diet, after 2 years, they can wean him off and he can just go back to a regular diet. And our experience was that after a couple of years on the diet, when we weaned him off, his seizures returned.
Oh.
I know, that was scary, but we called Dr. Freeman and he said, you can either do drugs, you can do nothing, or put him back on the diet. So we put him back on the diet for a couple of years. And after that, when we weaned him off, his seizures were gone. And he's never had another seizure, never taken another anti-epileptic drug, and has eaten whatever he wants for the last 25 years.
When you saw that he didn't have, so did he have seizures every day, no matter what, pretty much? Before he was on the keto diet?
You know, for a few months in there, I actually kept charts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine you'd do anything you can.
And because they were always like lowering or adding drugs or stuff like that.
You wanted to see how he reacted to everything.
Yeah, to different things. And I think there were days when he wouldn't have seizures, and I know there were days when he'd have like 100 seizures.
Mm. When he would go 2, 3, 4 days, when he went 2 or 3 or 4 days without a seizure, what was that? It must have been unbelievable. Like once he went like a week without it.
Yeah. Well, they used to, when they would try a new drug, back then there were maybe 8 or 10 anti-epileptic drugs. Mm. And so when you would switch from one drug to another, there would be what they call a honeymoon period, where the drug would temporarily seem to be doing the trick, but invariably they would stop working. And so then doctors would start to lower a dose of this and raise the dose of all sorts of stuff like that. So we were, certainly at the beginning with the diet, we were very apprehensive. We thought, well, maybe this is just one of those honeymoon periods.
It's very difficult, having children and just trying to steer the ship of like what they learn, how they learn, where they go, who their friends are, just all the different stuff as parents that you face. it must have been really difficult for you and your wife. Did you guys, I mean, I imagine you guys would fight about it. It must have caused a lot of stress in the household, and it must have been really brutal. So somebody that's listening to this that maybe has a kid that has seizures, or maybe has a kid that has a disease, what would your advice to them be to be able to how do you get through that period and still stay together?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think what you mentioned before about to the extent you can, but even that's sort of subjective, to involve the siblings in what's going on with the disease and the treatment of the disease, and but you can't. I mean, if they're little kids, it's really hard, because if they're little kids, you don't want them to know that mom and dad are panicked too. So you got to keep a stiff upper lip. Yeah. And I don't have, I mean, we did the best we could, but I think there was constant tension that was pretty much rarely acknowledged.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. You just did what you could.
Yeah, it's just survival.
And then your son now, is he healthy? Is everything, like he had to have a lot of treatment, it sounded like?
Yeah, he did. And, the first 2 years of brain development are the most important. And so he does have some autism, Charlie. But he made it to school and is a teacher and boxes and plays piano and stuff, but he does have some residual. And that's part of what keeps me motivated, because I think if all the doctors we had taken him to had just mentioned the word diet to us, we would have put him on the diet right away. I mean, right away. Statistically, now there's so much more science and everything, but statistically today we know in the published medical guidelines for the use of the ketogenic diet for people with epilepsy is that the diet should be strongly considered, that's their wording, after the failure of 2 medicines. Well, that would have been a few weeks with Charlie.
Right.
And the diet would have worked right away with Charlie. And so for the year when he was really sick and we were drugging him, and when he had a brain operation and all that stuff was unnecessary. We didn't have to do that. And
was there any other doctors at the time practicing that, like in different countries or anything like that?
I think that when Charlie started the ketogenic diet, he was one of maybe a dozen people in the world who were on a ketogenic diet for any reason.
Right.
For any reason at all. And of course and most of them, I'm sure, were on the diet for epilepsy. Because all the other subsequent stuff that we know about today hadn't really emerged.
How did you get him on a ketogenic diet? I mean, a clinical ketogenic diet is a tremendous amount of fat. And then at that time, there's a lot of stuff out there now, a lot of products you can take nowadays, but they didn't have the conveniences back then. So we were just like feeding them like bacon and oil and stuff, basically butter.
Was pretty much, we were very lucky in that there was a dietitian at Johns Hopkins who was back then in the early 90s on the verge of retiring, but she was still there when Charlie went on the diet, and so she was there during the heyday of the diet. At first when the diet for epilepsy was developed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, stuff like that, it was an early intervention. It's one of the first things they tried because there were no drugs. Or very few drugs. So, and Mrs. Kelly, the dietitian, was at Hopkins when we took Charlie there. So she had 40 years of experience with kids on a ketogenic diet back then. And so she would literally fax us meal plans.
Oh, nice.
We stayed, when we initiated the diet, we stayed in Baltimore for about a week, but then we came home and she would fax us meal plans when she'd kind of wait. But you're right, it was bacon, 2 grams of bacon, lots of heavy whipping cream because it had a heavy fat content. The other thing that's there's been so many changes since then. But there's no food labeling in the early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So everything had to be weighed and measured with this old gram scale, and we're adding oil to everything. Plus, he was a picky eater, so it would take forever to feed the cat.
Right. You had to basically wait for him to be very hungry, kind of thing.
But you didn't have the luxury of doing that.
Right.
Because he had to be fed 3 meals a day, because you want him, his level of ketosis to remain high.
Right.
So it was sort of, right. And there was, Nancy would like go to health food stores and just look for anything that had no sugar and tasted decent.
Right.
I mean, but there wasn't much. So it was, and there's a lot of like hot dogs he would eat, cheese.
Yeah, I think they say the grocery store has, I think 80% of what's in the grocery store has sugar in it.
Yes.
Even the bacon and some of the meats that you get. So, it's
right.
wild.
I just saw some sort of talk about that.
Yeah.
There's 600,000 processed food products in the United States today, and 80% are loaded with sugar.
And then it's owned by like 6 or 7 companies.
Right. We must have watched the same
Yeah, it only
TED
comes,
Talk or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
We're up against it when it comes to our health and nutrition. It makes it very difficult. What have you seen with your research and with the Charlie Foundation and bringing the keto diet to just get a lot more attention? What have you seen it also be able to help? Have you seen it be effective with like type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes? Have you seen it be effective for any other types of disease?
Yeah,
especially when it concerns children?
Yeah. Can I just backtrack
absolutely.
second?
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things I discovered why the ketogenic diet is underutilized is that physicians, and even dietitians, but physicians are not taught nutrition and diet therapy. And for me, that was like mind-blowing. How could you not teach? I mean, this is all about what we eat for all of us.
Even when you're in the hospital, they feed you crappy food.
They feed you crappy food.
And you're there because of your heart or something. It doesn't make any sense.
I know. But for me, that was a real, when you start to understand and appreciate the forces at work that are trying to talk us out of a healthy diet.
Right.
That's for me, that was a powerful part of the learning curve. When you learn the influence, ignorance of physicians, when you learn the power of drug companies, medical device companies, when you learn that some hospitals approve new protocols, not because based on revenue generating before efficacy. Right. I mean, there are a lot and when you learn that hospitals have trouble getting reimbursement for trained ketogenic dietitians. I mean, there's a lot of forces who don't want this information out there.
I remember my dad was very sick. He was in the hospital for like 70 days. And as he was there, he was in Jamaica Queens Hospital. I spoke with one of his doctors, and the doctor's like, oh, I heard so much about you from your mother. He's like, I'm glad you're finally here because I wanted to ask you a bunch of questions about nutrition. And I was like, how is this possible? How is he asking me questions about of course I study it and I research it just because I'm into fitness and I like training and all that, but I don't have any letters in front or behind my name for anything,
Right. Yeah.
And they just said they only took like one nutrition course is what some of the physicians were mentioning to me. It was like for a semester, and it wasn't really a huge focus.
I became friendly with a guy named Tom Minahan, who's a physician, an emergency room doctor, and his daughter had bad epilepsy, and he went through the same drill that most of us go through of taking his daughter, trying all these medicines on his daughter, and it didn't work. And so finally he got to a ketogenic diet and put her Mallory on the diet. And I think When last we talked, she'd been seizure-free for over 500 days. And as part of his job as an emergency room physician, what he does is he travels around the United States and lectures other emergency room physicians about emergency room protocols and stuff. So because of his daughter's experience with the diet, he's added 2 slides to his presentation. And I've been at a couple of them. There'll be like 100 physicians in the audience watching him present his stuff. And he's added 2 slides. He said, number 1, how many of you physicians in the audience have ever heard of a ketogenic diet? And his guesstimate is around 5%. And then after that, his follow-up question, of the 5% of you who have heard of a ketogenic diet, how many know it can be a cure for epilepsy? And no one has ever known that. I always ask people, do an informal survey among physicians you know, and ask them how much time, like you did you spend in medical school learning about diet or diet therapy and nutrition. And it's very little or none.
What else have you seen the ketogenic diet be able to assist with?
Yeah, so I think the first news, this is like, I was sitting on the sidelines, just promoting the diet for epilepsy. And I knew it had Atkins had promoted it, I think as early as the 70s as a weight loss diet. So that's the first I knew of other kind of stuff. But then in the late 90s, late 90s, we started to hear about using the diet for cancer. There's a guy named Tom Seyfried.
Yep, familiar with him, yeah.
Yeah, great guy. And he was on sort of the leading edge of that. Actually, the diet for cancer goes back to the 1930s. It has almost as long a history as the diet for epilepsy. There's a guy named Otto Warburg who developed glycolysis, and this whole idea that you can use a ketogenic diet for cancer goes back to the 1930s. And he won a Pulitzer Prize or something. So it was lying there. It was for a long time. But somewhere in the late 90s, Tom Seyfried and a bunch of other scientists began to figure out how the diet can be used for cancer. And and the mechanisms, I go to these meetings all the time. And for the use of the diet for anything. And I can't understand what they're saying. It's just too complicated. It's like way above my head. But I kind of know what they're talking about. So it makes me feel good. But you can sort of understand with cancer what's going on, because cancer cells, at least, feed off of sugar. And if you deprive a diet of sugar, the cancer cells don't get any food. They don't get any. So even I can get my mind around that. But it's much more sophisticated like that than that. And now, as you mentioned, they know so much more about which cancers it's more or less effective with, and mechanisms for different cancers.
What about other childhood diseases? Has anybody brought it up to you that maybe it's effective for type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes?
Definitely for type 2 diabetes. I think there's
type 1's complicated, kind of, right?
Pardon me?
Type 1 diabetes is kind of complicated.
I think it's more complicated. I think there's some information, but for type 2 diabetes, my understanding is that anyone or most people with type 2 diabetes should be on a ketogenic diet. It would be, because there's a correlation between sugar and type 2 diabetes.
In starting the foundation and now being super passionate about it, it sounds to me like you shifted your focus from being a director and a writer, screenplay writer, and things like that into just diving all the way into this.
Yeah.
To me, it seems really courageous to be somebody in Hollywood, and then to just say, like, I'm nobody, I don't know anything. I'm going to go and research this myself. I'm going to go to the library. Yeah. I think that's unconventional thinking on your part. I think that's pretty damn awesome, because I think a lot of people think, like, oh, you mentioned you have good connections with some big people and stuff, and so it would be easy just to say, I'm just going to throw money at this. I'm just going to leverage my celebrity off of this, just by connecting with the right people. But you just took it a step further, and you just kept researching it. You had to know. And so I think that's really awesome that you took it upon yourself. What do you think was obviously you're dealing with the difficulty of your son is a driving factor, but I heard you talk about this scenario where there was this building on fire, and the neighbor mentioned to the fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the neighbor mentioned to the fire department about them going up higher and how they could put it out. I think that really sums up maybe your mindset in some ways.
Well, that's interesting. So that was Mrs. Zabatsky's Law. And basically Mrs. Zabatsky's Law, this started years ago when I lived in Milwaukee and was just starting to partner up with David and Jerry Zucker. And Mrs. Zabatsky was our next door neighbor. And one day when the Zuckers were not at their house, Mrs. Zabatsky walked out on her second story porch and noticed the Zuckers' house was on fire. So she called the fire department, and they came and they tried to squirt water on the fire, but they couldn't get the water up to where the fire was. So she said to the firemen, why don't you come and stand on my porch, and then you can squirt from there. And so they did, and the fire went out. They put out the fire, which led to Mrs. Zabatsky's Law, which is never assume you can't do someone else's job better than they can. And then, of course, the humbling corollary, which was never assume someone else can't do your job better than you. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. Mm-hmm. But I think that was sort of, with Dave and Jerry and me, that was sort of our motivation because we were just these three guys from Milwaukee with no movie training or anything like that. But we thought we had a good idea, and so we got into the movie business.
Yeah, how did you guys meet up?
Well, our dads were actually business partners when we were boys in Milwaukee, and I'm 3 years older than David and 6 years older than Jerry, so our families knew each other, but not all that.
That's
we didn't know each other.
I didn't know you guys all knew each other for that long.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It goes back, and our sisters were college roommates and stuff. So yeah, our families were close, and then later after school, we ran into each other and started messing around with video recordings and having fun, making stupid jokes about farts and stuff.
What kind of comedy were you into at that time? Like, was there something that was inspiring you that you saw, or?
I think our inspiration was, I don't remember really. It was I'm trying to think, Annie Hall and I think it was
pre-everything.
Yeah, it was pre-everything. We had, electricity, so that was good. It was a long time ago. But I think the main inspiration for us was seeing how many things people took seriously that didn't have to be taken seriously. Like we never got into political humor because other people were doing that stuff. But when we would look at TV, early TV especially, and movies from back then, all these things were taken seriously. And it's, gosh, it just seems so easy to poke fun at the FBI and Father Knows Best and Love Story. I don't know, do you know Love Story, the movie Love Story?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about this guy, this couple, and because we did a little spoof on this couple, and if she gets sick and she goes to the hospital and she's dying of cancer, and we did a little skit about it, and she says to him, "How you doing, honey?" He's coming to visit her, and he says, "Well, I've got this kink in the back of my neck," and he goes on about his neck is sore, and she's, I don't know. So we would just have so much fun,
Right.
You know, making fun of those kinds of things.
And then you kind of got Kentucky Fried Movie started when you guys were in Milwaukee, you said, and then you kind of moved out here to California. Did you all move out together to California
Yeah.
to actively pursue making movies?
Yeah, David and Jerry and a couple other kids who were in the theater group and we like...
You just thought you were going to make it happen.
Well, our goal was to make it onto The Tonight Show, to be honest. That's what, if we could make The Tonight Show, it's all good.
Did that ever happen?
In fact, it did. And
Awesome.
And we sucked. and like for the first 20 years after that, this was like 1974 that we made it on The Tonight Show. For the first 20 years after that, whenever I'd go back to Milwaukee, our hometown, I'd wind up apologizing to people who had stayed up late that night because we were pretty bad. But, it was helpful. We learned a lot. We learned that it's helpful. It's not that the skits that we did were bad. It's that we never rehearsed with the camera. And so the camera would be over here, but the joke would be over there. So that was an early lesson in directing is, if you're going to do a joke, you might as well put the camera on the joke so people can see it.
Where did some of the ideas come from to have like kind of multiple jokes going on at like one time? Because a lot of times, like in one of the movies, like someone's being like waited on, and then the guy like walks away and he has no pants on.
Right.
Like there's just like stuff like that going on in the background. And,
right.
Like, did you guys have inspiration from something else, or was it just you guys were just being wacky and just trying to make each other laugh almost?
I think we were, in addition to having access to video equipment, which nobody did back then, so we got to film stuff and show it to an audience. In the theater, which was called Kentucky Fried Theater, we actually performed also. And that was a tremendous learning experience for us too, because none of us was comfortable being on stage acting. I mean, it didn't come naturally to any of us. And we get nervous and stuff. So we learned editing, and we learned how to pile jokes on top of jokes so the audience wouldn't have enough time to think these guys can't act. And so, but that's where that sort of style, that kind of relentless, real quick joke thing started. And it came up out of our just being so uncomfortable on stage and hating it when people weren't laughing.
Sucked at acting, so it's just like dump jokes on top of it.
I think once we got the theater open and running in Los Angeles, and we started getting reviews, we never had an empty seat in the house. And I think part of the appeal was people, when they saw us up on stage, they said, "Oh my gosh, that could be me. I mean, that guy's not an actor, that's for sure." So maybe that had something to do with it.
What was the first breakthrough, like in terms of movie, or where you guys were like, okay, now we can make anything that we want. It could be as dumb as we want.
Yeah.
Like, did you have a breakthrough where it was like kind of clear that you guys could make whatever films you wanted to move on to?
Yeah, I mean, Airplane just opened the door to Hollywood for us for as long as we wanted. I mean, it just worked pretty well, and we understood that kind of humor, so we could do that. I mean, I worked on movies after that, we did, that was not that kind of humor, and we really weren't all that good at it. But we really had a very strong feel for parody and those kinds of jokes and stuff. So, yeah, but Airplane was kind of a fluke too. I mean, we knew we were doing the theater, and the way we would get new jokes for the theater, for Kentucky Fried Theater, is we would leave the videotape recorder on all night, which everybody always did. But that was an innovation back in those days. And we would come to work the next day and play back what we had recorded the night before, because that's when the stupidest stuff was on TV. That's when the stupidest commercials were on, and the stupid everything. And one day we got to work, this is like in the early 70s, and we had recorded a movie called 0 Hour. And 0 Hour was a 1957 melodrama starring Dana Andrews and Sterling Hayden, Lynn Darnell and stuff, and it was the story of Airplane. It was Airplane. But it was a melodrama, dead serious. And so we just sort of rewrote 0 Hour as a comedy.
Do you think Airplane maybe worked because maybe at the time, because it came out like...
1980.
1980, yeah, it's like 40 years ago, right? Do you think maybe it worked really well because maybe at the time, like, I don't know, travel just wasn't as prevalent as it is now? It's pretty easy for people to get on a plane. It's fairly affordable.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so maybe back then it was, I guess, maybe I would just say that maybe flying was a little bit more of like a novel thing, right? The travel was a little bit more of a novel thing.
People still got dressed up to go on the plane and stuff like that. Yeah. I think there was that. And the other thing that was so fortunate was that the 70s was a decade of disaster movies. There was Airport and Airport 77 and The Towering Inferno and all these Poseidon Adventure, all this stuff, and they were all basically the same silly movie. So we were very, very lucky to come across 0 Hour and figure out, we can just make this a comedy.
Who's funnier, Lloyd Bridges or Leslie Nielsen?
Well, they had different approaches. They really did. Leslie was I think Leslie was more just a natural comedian. Lloyd is an actor.
Yeah.
He was an actor. And so he thinks the way actors think, like, what's my motivation? And
right.
What's my character? And stuff. And he would always try to approach it that way. And he'd say, just say the words. Just say the lines. You don't have to, don't overthink it.
Right.
We never thought about it either. We're just trying to say something silly and to say. And Leslie kind of naturally came to that.
Yeah.
He was just sort of a natural clown. And even though he looked Leslie always carried a little fart machine.
Of course he did.
Yeah. And it was this little thing that you would just squeeze and it would make the sound of a fart. And he always had it on him. And he was all, like, he'd go in elevators and he would be in the elevator and he would go. And not only that would it make the sound of a fart, but he would sort of move uncomfortably.
Oh, yeah. He'd get
One
into
time
it.
we were doing a show promoting something or other on TV. And he took his fart machine, and the woman who was interviewing us didn't.
She wasn't into it.
No, and she was so uncomfortable because he kept farting. But so he really was a kind of a sophomore clown too.
What made you think that Charlie Sheen would be funny?
Well, he was great in Major League, but when we went to
Major League's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. He has
Awesome
a real
movie.
Yeah. And that preceded, but when we went to 20th Century Fox and pitched the idea of Hot Shots, it was Joe Roth, who ran 20th Century Fox at the time, said, great, you can do it. I think you need to get Charlie Sheen. And it was his idea. So Charlie came in, well, we had a meeting, and it was kind of awkward, and, you know, but it turned out he was like a fish in water, doing that kind of humor. He just had a real, I don't think I ever directed him. He just went and did it. And then we really connected too, and he was a great guy. And we connected a lot through sports. And he knew I was from Milwaukee, and a Packers fan, and a Milwaukee Brewers fan, a Braves fan before the Brewers got there, and all that. And a couple times he gave me autographed baseballs and footballs and stuff like that. We talked sports a lot. And he was just a great guy. I don't know what happened, but he was really fun.
Do you have anything left movie-wise? Is there any burning desire to create any other type of film, or would it be more? I know you've done some documentaries and stuff like that too. Yeah. But is there any more silliness that has to get out of you, or you think you've got it all out?
Well, you know, I think the movie business, like what we do, it's really a passion business. And I did make a movie called First Do No Harm with Meryl Streep about the ketogenic diet. And that, it very much mimicked our experience with Charlie and the ketogenic diet. It was a true story, a different family, but who also came across the diet, and the diet cured their kid, and they encountered lots of resistance to a ketogenic diet and all that kind of stuff. And so I think I cried every day on the set making that movie, because it was we made the movie in 97, and Charlie was sick in 93, so it was kind of recent history. And
like reliving it almost.
Yeah, it really was. And so that kind of spoiled me. I never could work up that much passion again for the movie business. And of course, nobody wanted to hire me to make serious movies or even semi-serious movies. They just wanted me to do fart jokes for teenage boys, which is fine. I'll bet there's an audience for a fart joke right there. But I just sort of lost my passion for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, amazing career and amazing story, and it's amazing that you have this newfound passion. What are some other things that you have maybe coming up in the future with the Charlie Foundation? Is there some events that you have coming up, or a couple of things you're excited about?
Well, it's actually this year is the 100th anniversary of the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. So there are a bunch of things that were planned, and they're all pandemic, right? Kind of on the, we're all kind of waiting to see how we're going to have to do stuff virtually, or we can do it in person. There's a global meeting in Brighton, England in October, and there are a bunch of meetings where we get together that are very helpful, because we get scientists and physicians and dietitians together, and they can compare notes and talk about the state of the art with the diet and new applications, like you mentioned, for cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
What are people like me supposed to do? Naked Gun fan, Airplane fan, Hot Shots fan. Is there anybody that does a similar style of comedy that you've seen?
Oh gosh, no, I have.
Some of the young guys coming up.
I haven't.
I just have to keep watching old stuff.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what it's about. I just don't know. But I don't see stuff that's as stupid as the stuff we did.
No one has done it stupider.
Right. No, we always would say when it's really working, that it's like stupidity raised to an art form.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.